Hello everyone, my name is Avishay, and today I'm going to be talking about a hobby of mine, Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a card game, as you have seen from the title. But unlike other card games like, Uno or whatever you want to compare it to, it has a very strong element of freedom. Not only does it have a strong element of freedom, but it also has a very strong element of change, which is why I chose it for this TED Talk. Now, let's go back to the origins of Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Was originally a manga created by Kazuki Takahashi, and his hit manga was about, people playing the card game itself. After the manga would be released, people would like it so much that they would want for him to actually make those cards. And so he did, and that is how Yu-Gi-Oh! Was born. Now, there are basic rules to Yu-Gi-Oh! In Yu-Gi-Oh!, each player starts with 8,000 life points. You want to lower your opponent's life points to 0. You can do that through multiple ways. The most basic one is attacking with your monsters. But you can also use special effects like trap cards or magic cards to do damage to your opponent. Now, why am I doing a TED Talk about a card game, you may be asking? And I have asking the same question. But the reason why is because I think it's special compared to other card games. See, I think a big problem I find with other games is that it's very linear. Like, yes, you can play Monopoly, but when you play it for 500 times, you get a bit bored. And the same thing with Uno. It's very linear, it's very straight. When you look at the cards, eventually they just start blurring together. There's not a lot of speciality, not a lot of change in the card games themselves. Even things like Uno, maybe every couple of years they'll produce something new, but no one cares about it. It usually flops. And you might be thinking, okay, well, what about actual TCGs, aka trading card games, like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, which I'm sure none of you have heard of? Those release cards, right? Well, it's still very straightforward. The idea here is to do something and then to destroy your opponent, but it doesn't really have a lot of depth and complexity to it compared to Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, I'm going to go look at the first era of Yu-Gi-Oh! In my opinion, GOAT format. GOAT format is between 2001 and 2004, which was when the cards would be released in America. During this time, a lot of cards were very badly made, as they didn't exactly know how to create cards, with some cards making the game never end, some cards being an infinite loop, and some cards ending the game in one turn. One of the most famous examples of this is Magical Scientist. Woo. Magical Scientist was part of a deck called Magical Scientist FTK. FTK stands for First Turn Kill, which means ending the game in one turn. If Magical Scientist is on the field with this very specific monster called Catapult Turtle, you win the game. Many players would hate this, as it got rid of a lot of skill from the game. No longer would this game be dominated by who's smarter, who's actually better at it, but it's whoever could get these two monsters on the field, whoever was lucky, whoever went first. And so, the creators of the game would enlist something new, the ban list, an idea to ban these cards from everything competitive play, as people wouldn't enjoy going against them. And so these cards and many of the other problematic cards, these guys, would be banned forever in the ban list. And so that would be the end of GOAT format. A subtle beginning to it with many problems, but it's only the beginning. So let's skip 10 years forward to Triangle format. This is a format of Yu-Gi-Oh! In which 3 cards would dominate the meta. These 3 cards would respond to each other like rock, paper, scissors, shoot, with Burning Abyss, Cleefort, and Shaddoll being the main contenders for here. Now, because this is 10 years later, a lot of FTK's never-ending games and loops would not even exist. But it doesn't mean Yu-Gi-Oh! Was perfect, as there was still one very big problem: floodgates. Floodgates is a Yu-Gi-Oh! Term for cards that remove an aspect from the game. For example, some of these floodgates just get rid of part of a game. You know how there are monsters? Well, this fun little card says no monsters. In the simplest way, it doesn't take any skill to use, which means people hated it. What made floodgates such a big problem in Yu-Gi-Oh! Was how it's super generic. You could use it anywhere, and people would still be mad, because no deck didn't want these in their, deck. And no skill was in the game. It doesn't matter how good you are. You couldn't beat these cards. And so you'd be thinking, well, why didn't they just ban it? That's what they did with the other problem cards. Well, there's one more big problem. See, the Cleefort deck was highly dependent on these floodgates, meaning that if you get rid of the floodgates, you get rid of the entire format. This would imbalance it and make it practically an unfun mess. So they decided to introduce something new, something called Infernoids. These were cards that would be more powerful the more floodgates there are, and they could ignore floodgates. This was to try and lower the incentive for floodgates and the usage of it. And that would work for a very long time. And so, that is the end of Triangle format. And then there's the final format, Modern. Now, Modern format is also known as Cash format, is dominated by these very specific cards, the Cash Tiras. Now, just because it's 10 years later doesn't mean it's evolved too much, because these guys are an FTK. Amazing. Now, the way they work is that they have this really weird ability called zone locking. And you give her 16 zones where you can put your cards. These guys can just make you not be able to use it. And for some reason, this is what they can do. You see the yellow? You can't put a card there. So in the simplest way, you can't put a card anywhere. The game ends like this. And many people would hate this, because again, it's unfun, and it doesn't have any skill in it. It's just a combo. But it got worse. See, this card, the boss of a deck, is a floodgate. So even if they couldn't pull off the FTK, they would still get a floodgate on field. Amazing. And so they decided to ban it. That's what they would do. But again, that didn't work. The deck was too powerful, and it would stay competitively viable until they banned it again. But it still wouldn't die. It would be too powerful to stop. And so they tried to introduce something new, like the Infernoids. They brought a new type of cards, the Snake Eyes. Now, the Snake Eyes were trying to weaken the Kashtira with their Reign of Terror. The biggest problem is that they didn't realize that they made Snake Eyes way too powerful. So you didn't have to worry no more about the mean old Kashtira cards. Now you have to worry about Snake Eyes, which I think is way worse. Now that we're done with history, what's the change here? I see the Danes and maybe the game, but how did it really change? Well, here's the thing. Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game it evolves so much. While most games don't take too many risks, they have an idea for what they want, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is kinda all over the place. They have so many different abilities and archetypes and decks and millions of stuff, to the point where people are constantly testing it out. Things like magical scientists were never meant to be good, but when people actually start experimenting with it, they realize that maybe it's actually usable. Now, I think what I'm actually trying to say here mainly is how change is very important. And I'm using Yu-Gi-Oh! Here because Yu-Gi-Oh! What makes it so special is the change in it. And I think that what I'm trying to say here is change is fun. Without change, things would be boring. And people don't like boring things. So you need change in your life. That is the absolute end of my presentation.